Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Barrens Chat Podcast. I'm Sod, and with me tonight is my co-host, Cuck. This is a podcast about World of Warcraft by two guys who play it. Guck, shortly after we recorded last week, we got hit with some excellent news. The pre-patch is on the PTR, which is awesome. So if anybody that's not in beta can go experiment with class changes and the pre-patch event right now in PTR, all you have to do is opt in. It'll immediately show up on your client and you can go dabble, which is awesome. And I've played it quite a bit myself and it is very cool. Other than that, just, moderate farming, but really the announcement of this pre-patch and PTR and the excitement and what that means for the potential launch of the pre-patch and the potential Shadowlands launch itself looming over us is very exciting stuff. What do you think?
Yeah, the pre-patch was 100% the biggest thing that happened this week. A lot of people were very upset about the Scourge invasion. Certain people just constantly dying. Immediately your gear needs to be repaired just because you've died 10 times in a row. It seems interesting. I mean, you can control a ghoul or basically just be a human in a city overrun with ghouls. This is very similar to the invasion event that they did earlier in WoW's timeline. But, it's interesting. I don't know if it's something that I really like as much as I liked the BFA pre-patch. The BFA pre-patch was actually pretty fun. If you remember back to it, it involved a lot of essentially open world PvP when you would go to, I think we spent most of our time in Darkshore just doing, I don't remember if it was dailies or what, but we were in Darkshore doing mostly world PvP as like groups of 5, just roaming around doing group fights. And that was, kind of inherently tied to the idea that the Battle for Azeroth would be a battle for control between the factions, and there were definitely some hints for the lore heads that are thinking like, okay, this could be a battle for Azeroth, but also a battle for the sake of Azeroth or for the life of Azeroth against N'Zoth and the Old Gods, potentially even against Sylvanas and her plans with the Jailer. So I actually think that despite BFA being bad, the pre-patch was really good, and hopefully what that means is for Shadowlands, if the pre-patch is bad, then the expansion will be good. So, and I have no reason to believe that's going to happen, but, hopefully that's the case. I didn't get a chance to get onto it, but when I'm thinking about pre-patch, that first makes me think about, okay, well, sure, the pre-patch is coming, but what are the things that I'm going to lose with the release of Shadowlands, right? So we're going to get pre-patch, and that's going to give you a window of time to still get some stuff, potentially. Some things that are BFA restricted may go away at the pre-patch. Some things won't be able to be earned anymore. Some things won't be able to be earned once Shadowlands launches. So I think it's an important time right now that we have PTR pre-patch. It's important that if you were putting off certain things to do in BFA, you get a jump on it now. Sod, you did the right thing, have been mostly more or less weekly doing your Mythic Jaina kills, and you finally got the Mythic mount. That's one of the huge things, because right now you run a Mythic Jaina pug, it's cheesable, it's free, and 2 people get the mount every time. Once Shadowlands is out, this is going to be another one of those mounts that goes on that 1% drop, sub 1% drop rate. So, there is a clear window of time right now to do some BFA stuff that will be going away.
Yeah, and it's so easy to pug. I actually tried to sell it to pretty much anybody that would buy it at the end of the run, but a lot of people dropped the group really quick. Now, I pugged that on 4 characters, and really, probably only 1 or 2 of my characters are actually really optimized. So it's puggable. If you're 450 or higher, you can definitely pug it. If you're not running the group, you're probably not going to get into it. And if you don't lead the group well when you run it, you're probably gonna have everybody leave on you. But this raid is very easy to be done, and it's great that I have the mount because now I can still kill it consistently with my friends. And that means that the 2 mounts are going to drop for 19 people as opposed to 20. They have a slightly higher percent chance of getting the drop. And you know, it's just a nice thing to do. It's very doable. If you have a decent guild, you don't even need a decent guild. If you have a competent guild that can understand raid strategy and movement, which isn't very hard, I don't even think it's a very big DPS check, you can definitely kill this boss. It can be done. So definitely talk to your guilds, talk to your friends, your community, get in that. I mean, that's an easy mount to get before it gets to a very low drop rate. I'm still farming Invincible and Ashes of Alar, and I really hate farming it. So definitely get on top of that. The Brutosaur is going away. Really, if you don't have a lot of gold, if you want that, you pretty much have to buy WoW tokens, which is probably very expensive. I think that would cost like a few $100s to get that much gold. Definitely not worth it unless you really, really want that mount. I'm certainly not going to get it, unfortunately or fortunately. I'm really not a huge collector either. Like, I would have sold that mount, and if I didn't get it by the end of the expansion, I wouldn't have been upset. Guck, I'm sure you're pretty much the same way. I definitely use the mount now, but I like the gold a little bit more.
The gold goes farther. Having a mount with a cool model that looks really cool, like, it is redeeming. I think the Jaina mount is a great mount. Is it 100K great? I mean, potentially even more than that, depending on who wants to buy it. I don't think so. I think having a month of game time, having a WoW token, that kind of outweighs any mount, because they all fly, more or less. You know, like, you got ground mounts and you have flying mounts, and you have an abundance of both. So utility-wise, for someone who plays the game for other things, yeah, I'm not super set on that. But along that same route, you know, N'Zoth, Mythic N'Zoth has the same thing. He's got a mount, but that obviously requires a guild group with actual competent organization. That one is one that I've written off. The Brutosaur I've written off. Some of the titles and achievements and things like that. Like, can you believe that there's an achievement for getting every single essence that you can use on a spec to rank 4, and it just gives you a title? Like, and that's going to go away when Shadowlands comes up. There is no chance that I even try to get that title.
Yeah. Well, they have the appearance too, right? Like, I don't even know what they do, but I think they also have like a visual effect when you use the essence. I'm not into it, but you know, some people are.
Yeah, your rank 4 essence will have a new cosmetic effect, but we're also not going to have access to using those essences unless we're on Azeroth. So for Shadowlands content, doesn't seem to be really important. But you know, it's just one of those things, I guess, that is out there for you to do if you want to do it. I personally don't want to do it. I think the best thing now would be to think about, you know, what's realistic. And the Jaina mount is probably one of the most realistic goals that anyone can set for themselves. Literally, all you need to do is have a group where everyone takes interrupt off their bar, so no one interrupts Jaina in the second phase, and you just cheese it through. And on the first phase, when everyone's on the boat, you just have the people who get hit with Annihilation, or what is it called? No, Avalanche. Have the Avalanche targets run out of the group. And that's it. It's a super simple run. And then, boom, you collect 2 mounts. There's a 10% chance that you get the mount every time you do it on every character every week. So that is something that is super realistic. Suddenly joining a mythic raid team that gets N'Zoth down, not super realistic, unless you're already doing prog.
Or you have a ton of gold.
Or you have a ton of gold, or a friend in a guild where they farm mythic and they can just carry you for free. There are certain things that are going away with the end of BFA that are not likely to matter, and some things that, you know, could matter. Another thing that might be interesting for some people, I haven't checked on the drop rate for, like, doubloons, but if you are a mount collector, I personally am not, and I don't see myself doing this, but it's going to be much harder when Shadowlands is out to get island expedition groups. And I know there are a ton of mounts that either drop in the islands, or I think you can buy them with your doubloons. I haven't looked into it that much, because I just really hate islands and warfronts and all of the systems that they put in BFA, and I don't really intend to run any of them any more than I have to. But that is another thing that, I believe is realistic, depending on the rate at which the doubloons drop. If you're going for a doubloon purchasable mount, there's a lot of interesting stuff that you can do that is feasible, that will be completable within a timetable that should fit in this hopefully maybe narrow window between now and the official release of the pre-patch. I think now is a good time for us to just kind of switch to our speculation. Now that pre-patch is on PTR, how big of a window do we have, do you think? When do you think we're going to see the pre-patch go live?
So I have seen so much speculation, and actually like really good speculation, right? So Jason from the Starting Zone, it's a really good podcast. He tweeted out that the BFA pre-patch went on PTR, I think like June 13th or 14th, somewhere around that time frame. A month later, pre-patch went live, and a month after that, the expansion launched. So that's a 2-month window. Now, what that would mean for us is that the pre-patch would go live probably second week of September, maybe, and then we'd see a launch somewhere in the middle of October, give or take. Now, reason why I don't know if that will happen, I do hope that is accurate. I'd love to see that, and I know they've done very well with testing the beta and whatnot, so I suppose it is feasible. And the raid and Mythic Plus doesn't have to be ready at the launch of the expansion, because obviously those take 3 full resets to release, so we have that time. Now, Battle for Azeroth's release date, I looked up today. It was announced on April 5th. So that was 4 months in advance of the expansion launching. That's the only reason why I don't know. Like, we don't have a date on the expansion launch, which is why I don't want to say it's definitely going to launch in the middle of October, when we could certainly see a November or even December launch. I mean, they have been fairly confident that they're going to release it in the fourth quarter of this year. And I would love to see it in October. I think that would be great. But who knows? I'd love to see pre-patch in a month. I'd love to have a reason to keep playing WoW. Just messing around in the pre-patch has been awesome. What do you think about the speculation?
I think it's mostly valid, but I think the parts of the current kind of, obviously the global pandemic, that invalidates a lot of the timetables that we saw earlier. Like, sure, of course it would be great if, we see mid-August PTR, mid-September we see pre-patch, and then mid-October we see the launch. That would be great, but we have to account for the fact that Blizzard doesn't have as much in-house labor right now. I personally would like to see pre-patch last a little bit longer. I'd like to see it be on the PTR a little bit longer. That to me is, one more week of, what are the last minute complaints that we get in? What are the last minute bugs? What are the last minute things that we could potentially get in and work with, given our, extended timetable? I think right now people appreciate the fact that Blizzard is trying to get us this product. They have said Q4 very consistently, which is, winter time release. But, recently we got Ian Hezekostas and others saying that they're going to push for a fall release. But I still feel like they are confident with the Q4. If they do push back a release into Q4, I don't think it would be a big deal, because that has been the opinion they've held most strongly. This fall release would be great, but it is, potentially too quick. I want to make sure that it's going to be a great game with great systems. That was the biggest problem with BFA. We had a quick pre-patch, a quick PTR phase, and we ended up getting a version of the game that was rolled out with terrible systems. And one of the things that I want to talk with you about in this episode is very related and central around those systems, and it could have major consequences in the end game through the entire expansion, much the same way that Azerite armor had unforeseen consequences through the entirety of BFA. So I personally, it's a win-win for me, because if I get Shadowlands sooner, I get Shadowlands sooner. And if I get Shadowlands later, I'm hoping it's going to be a more refined product. But, that's kind of where I'm at. I'm a little apprehensive because of COVID and how that probably should affect the timeline. But if I'm surprised, it's going to be a pleasant surprise, hopefully.
Yeah, so the reason I'm not overly concerned with the endgame systems, other than like maybe balance issues, is because they've been testing them since alpha, right? They've been testing Torghast since very early in the alpha. They're in beta and people are testing covenants right now. Like, they're doing pretty much a full end game test right now. And they didn't do that in the Battle for Azeroth alpha, not alpha, in beta, until like a week or two before the expansion launched. So I'd say testing wise, they have to be way ahead of schedule, and the beta builds are coming out every week. And I think, I don't know, I would say the game, given its state in beta, is probably at a pretty close place gameplay wise to where they want it. You definitely don't want to see a system like Azerite armor where they just continuously put system on top of system to fix it. I'd definitely like to see the system be refined so that we don't have to grind essences on multiple characters just to fix the game. Essences were a great addition. Where they failed was having to grind them over and over again on multiple characters in order to play them to an effective rate. And that's still currently a problem in the expansion to this day. And it's an even worse problem with corruption until they take that out in the pre-patch. So overall, I'm confident and hopeful. I mean, fall goes until December 20th, right? So the first day of winter is December 21st. So, I mean, that's a very big window for this game to be released, and we'll see what happens. I definitely expect to see it this year. I think just because of how well testing has gone, that we'll see it. And if it gets delayed, it gets delayed. I'm in school in the fall, so delaying it for me personally isn't like the worst thing ever, although I definitely want it to come out so I could be excited about WoW again.
I wonder if they were tricky in the way that they spoke and used they say Q4 as a release for like the business side of it, and then when they say fall, they're using it like you refer to it, as a not as Q3 fall, but as like the calendar season fall, which has a lot of overlap, like you said, with Q4. So yeah, I'm hopeful, and I feel like it's going to be a win-win either way. But before we get off of it too much, I do want to talk about essentially the system that I have in mind when I think about issues is well, let me rewind it a little bit. So I loved Legion. Legion was a phenomenal expansion. One of the fun dungeons in there that had a unique mechanic to it was the Court of Stars. And in the Court of Stars, there were different interactable objects or NPCs that, depending on your professions, you could interact with, and they would give your group something. If you were an alchemist, you could actually poison the potion that the first boss of the dungeon drinks, and it instantly kills it. So the incentive to bring an alchemist to the group was actually really high, and there were other traps and things around the dungeon that would accelerate or slow down, either accelerate your rate or slow down the progression of the enemies, and it was really kind of fun. There was a big open courtyard where there were a bunch of different buffs that you could get depending on your professions or maybe even class stuff, and it just felt fun. It was a nice little addition. I think it was good largely because there was an abundance of choice. And in the Court of Stars, there were so many different things, and only a few instances where it was like, yeah, for sure, you need this profession. What I'm worried about is what we're seeing now in Shadowlands is the same kind of element, right? So I like that part of Court of Stars where, okay, depending on how you built your character, there are certain specific things that you can interact with. But now in Shadowlands, they're doing that same thing with what seems to be a lot of the dungeons, hopefully not all of them, but a lot of them, and with Covenant-related abilities. So now, what I've seen most recently is in The Other Side, which is kind of like the Rebirth, the Loa-themed dungeon. There's a lot of stuff for Night Fae, particularly something that gives them a big AoE stun, I believe. So, how is this going to affect the end game? Are you going to have to really build your group in a certain way that every single person is a different covenant? Are you going to have to stack covenants? Are you going to have to basically farm and target only those high keys that match the covenant that you're a part of? Is that going to get tiring and sickeningly boring after a little while? I'm curious to see what you think about it and how it kind of pertains to the end game. This is Covenants. This is the flagship system. This is on the spine of the box when you buy Shadowlands. This is not going anywhere. And if they want to implement something like this, it's dangerous. What do you think?
I think it's a balancing nightmare, specifically for Mythic Plus and competitive Mythic Plus, right? I mean, you get to those high-end Mythic Plus, like, say, I don't know, like early on in the expansion, I would say 15 is probably going to be pretty high, maybe 20. So you get to those high-end Mythic Plus, and if you don't have the specific Covenant ability or trash skip, whatever it is just going to be a balancing nightmare. Now, what does that do? Maybe that makes the MDI more balanced class-wise, and you'll just see the 5 top DPS classes, and they'll all be playing different covenants, and maybe we'll see something like that. But I don't know. I think it's going to be tough to see the future with like how this affects pugging, right? If you don't have a Night Fae in your group going into the other side, how's that affecting your group? I mean, is the dungeon still going to be doable at a high level, or are you screwed? So kind of like interesting interactions there. It's not like the least favorite thing that I've ever seen, but it's definitely concerning.
I think an easy way for them to fix this would be to, instead of having thematic dungeons where this is a very Night Fae dungeon, this is the Maldraxxus dungeon, whatever, and then obviously in those dungeons there should be a lot of, if it's Night Fae themed, there should be Night Fae stuff. If it's Maldraxxus themed, there should be Necrolord stuff. Sure, like, because that's your covenant, you should have an abundance of options. But every dungeon, if there is an option for one covenant, there should at least be other options for the other covenants. Ways that, may be more creative, maybe more out of the box, maybe require more forethought or planning, but are still, there's still some utility present in being a Venthyr covenant in the Night Fae dungeon, right? Like, you still want to have something. Because if there's nothing, you're going to feel like either, okay, I'm running the wrong dungeon, I need to only run the Venthyr-themed dungeons, or you're going to feel like I made the wrong choice and I picked a bad covenant because this is the dungeon that people like to run. This is the dungeon that I like to run, but the covenant that I like doesn't coincide with the dungeon that I like. And like casual players or, semi-hardcore players or even hardcore players, I think everyone's going to struggle with that for different reasons, but from the same problem.
Yeah, and there's definitely been like a lot of outcry about this, specifically with YouTube creators that we've seen, and it's definitely a justified concern. I think balancing things like that is, maybe not impossible, but probably pretty close to impossible. It certainly has come out late in the testing phase. So will we see a balance in season 1? No, but maybe they balance it by season 2 or 3 and it's better. Who knows? It's concerning. It's concerning for sure, but I don't hate the individualism for covenants. It's more so a concern about balance for me. And like, that's really the only reason why I'm not a fan of the Covenant system, but I also haven't experimented with it either. So I guess we'll just see where it goes.
Yeah, we'll just have to wait and see. I do agree with you that they should have some cool individualistic flavor elements that bring value to your Covenant choice, but yeah, it's something that we'll have to wait and see. And I personally, I really hope that there is a thematic philosophical change going on inside Blizzard, because we saw problems at the for Mythic Dungeons at the MDI level all the way down very early on. We saw that, okay, so Mythic Dungeons, they're very like trash dense, and it's very easy to get to the end with exactly 100% trash, but you've skipped using shrouds and invis pots, so much stuff. And if that's the case, well, then obviously the meta is going to be bring rogues. And that was the meta at the MDI and down for the longest time in BFA, until we finally got Season 4 with Awakened, which I think is probably, innovative, problem-solving, it's story relevant. It was one of the best seasonal affixes, and one of the best affixes that they added to Mythic Plus. The Awakened towers that allow you to skip trash in a way that your group has full control over without needing a rogue. It was brilliant, and it solved a problem that the community had with Mythic Dungeons for a while, but it took until Season 4. I want to see in Season 1, because we are going to run into a lot of these similar mistakes, Covenant-specific mechanics in dungeons that require people to manage Covenants and the Covenant breakdown of their group. Those problems, those Season 1 problems, they need to get fixed in Season 2. And it can't be another fiasco where it's like, oh, well, we'll put in a new system that fixes it in 9.2, but then we won't change it when we get 9.3 because now we're dealing with 9.3 systems, which is the same essence problem we got in BFA all over again. So I'm hoping we see, because I'm expecting problems. There will be problems. But I'm hoping that we see, once we get those problems, once we encounter those problems in Season 1 of Mythic Plus, that we see some actual change in Season 2. But we just have to wait and see. There's no way to predict that.
Yeah, and I also think that they grossly underestimate the meta that unfolds from the top 1% of the player base trickling down into, where you and I play, and even lower than where we play. Like, that meta that forms is huge. I mean, everybody follows it. Like, I'm playing a hunter right now because I would never be able to get into a Mythic Plus key on my Warlock, and for good reason, because my Warlock isn't as good as a hunter. It's just not. And that meta trickles down. It doesn't matter that my Warlock is 475 item level and that I can, pump on bosses. Like, that doesn't matter. Like, there's a lot more to a Mythic Plus, and that meta is going to trickle all the way down in the community to the people that are doing even +6s and 7s. I mean, that happens. Like, not the entire player base, but a lot of the player base, derives opinions about classes from the top 1% that they see in the MDI, that they see on streams, that they see in the Race to World First. And, sometimes for good reason, sometimes, not, but there is a reason for it. And, those classes are the best classes to be played in the game at that current point, so that's why people take them.
Yeah, min-maxing as a interest in WoW isn't exclusively something for hardcore or even semi-hardcore players. Sometimes even the casual player base will think like, okay, well, I kind of want to play DPS. I guess I want to play ranged DPS. But after that point, they don't really care. A lot of people are just going to find out, like, Google Warcraft logs, whatever it is, depending on their level of expertise, they're going to ask the question of what ranged DPS, what melee DPS should I play? And if they search for that answer, the number one response is going to be whoever deals the most damage. And that is going to be, changing by patch, changing by hotfix. But there will be an answer. And you're right. Like, this meta trickles down from the top, and people will follow it even without caring so much about, mythic rating. If they're just like, I want to play a class that's good, they're going to pick a class that's good. People don't want to play a class that they think is bad or that other people think is bad, because that's just how people work. Like, you don't want to, that's not true. There are some people that really like the underdog story where, and I'm thinking about, Wreckful, rest in peace, where he's like, there's this meta spec for rogue. I'm not going to play that spec. I'm going to be good at the off meta. And there are definitely people like that like to set themselves up with a challenge and perform just immense at a high level with the off meta class. And that's where they get their enjoyment. That's fucking cool. I'm not going to fault you on that. But in general, people just like to play what's good. And that meta comes from the top, and it's very pervasive, like you said.
Yeah, and there's no way to stop it from being, trickling down into even, normal dungeons and normal guilds. Like, a lot of those guilds don't have requirements. Like, Feral Druid's been a meme for a long time, right? And I've taken Feral Druids into my plus 20 keys because, they're actually not that bad if they are played at a high level. So if I see one with a decent IO, I'm not afraid to take it. But, that spec, that class has been a meme since Legion, pretty much. I haven't seen one since Emerald Nightmare. Really, I haven't seen one in a raid since Emerald Nightmare anyway.
Yeah, 100%. And it works both ways too, because you can see, okay, if you're playing Feral and your IO is really high as Feral, that means you're committed to either the meme or you're committed to fighting that meta mentality. And those players, they may be standout good players that are executing their character at a really high level, but because of their kit, because of their character, they're not doing as much objectively. Especially for building a guild, those are the types of players that you want. You want players like that because those are the guys that become the mechanic bosses. Those are the guys that, if they do end up switching classes to a more flavor of the month spec, they will dominate on the meters. Those are the people that you want to work into your communities in the long run, I think, too, as another add-on to these off-meta warriors.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
I think that's kind of all that we had. Another solid episode. Sod, anything else you want to add before we wrap it up?
No, thank you for listening. I checked the numbers again. I cannot believe that we have that many people that listen to us. Thank you, everyone, for the support.
Yeah, always. We always appreciate that. Thank you guys for listening. Always appreciate the rates and reviews on Apple Podcast. Check us out on Twitter at Barrens Chat Pod, at Saudi LOL, or at Guckyman. Hit us up on our website. That's got all our contact info. That's baronschat.podbean.com. And we'll see you guys in the next one.